Welcome to the next Gurukul webinar series episode. This is an ongoing series of talks presented by thinkers involved with the Gurukul movement, a worldwide movement dedicated to broadening the scope of thinking by looking at the links between social change, spirituality, and our personal lives. Today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sid Jordan, otherwise known as Acharya Vishvamitra. He's combined careers as a licensed clinical psychologist and meditation teacher since 1971, when he was initiated into the tantric practices of Anandamarg. As a clinical psychologist, he taught psychotherapy, meditation, yoga, and community psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina for 25 years. During that period, he also served for 5 years as director of the Mental Health, Alcohol and Drug Services at the Franklin C. Feta Neighborhood Health Care Center in Charleston, South Carolina. In 1994, he moved to Asheville, North Carolina, to develop an intentional Anandamarg community known as Anandagiri, or Daughter of the Mountain. It's on the French Broad River near Marshall, North Carolina. In 1997, he trained to be an Anandamarga family acharya, or yoga teacher, in India, committed to giving personal instructions in meditation and yoga. He is currently director of the Prama Institute on the Anandagiri property, where he helps direct programming and teaches yoga psychology and spiritual practices. At the Prama Wellness Center, he teaches yoga therapy and stress management to individuals and groups. He continues to offer his 40 years of experience and teaching of yoga psychology, philosophy, and practices to audiences worldwide. Today, Dr. Sid Jordan is going to tell us about the era of Neohumanism, and I'm now going to hand over to Vishvamitra to take us through your thinking. Welcome all, and please do remember, questions can be queued.
Namaskar. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar and thank Manoranjan for hosting these webinars. This is the fourth webinar in the series, and it follows his webinar on the evolution of consciousness. This webinar is about the era of Neohumanism towards a cooperative spiritual society. The thesis and the take-home for this is that we are demonstrating a convergence of knowledge, number one, and evidence for many fields of endeavor to attest to the fact that we've crossed the threshold into a new era of peace and cooperation. Secondly, we want to present the biological, psychosocial, and spiritual forces that are moving us towards greater cooperation and unity. Thirdly, Neohumanism serves as a hub for the synthesis of universal morality, socioeconomic, and psychosocial movements, contributing to an era of cooperation and spirituality. So we find ourselves in an economic and environmental crisis, an economic and environmental meltdown that leaves us no alternative to finding a common ground to survive or thrive. But we must remember Fuller's admonition that there's no energy crisis, a food crisis, or environmental crisis. There's only a crisis of ignorance. And this reminds us that we need to conduct a program of massive education to liberate people from this ignorance. We begin by looking at the sacred economics of Charles Eisenstein. This subtitled Money, Gift, and Society in the Age of Transition speaks to the same concept that we are in a current crisis that's a convergence of many crises in many fields of money, energy, education, so forth, that is more of a birth crisis, expelling us from the old world into a new. Eisenstein says that economic stability and justice must go hand in hand. If we are to come to some global cooperation about achieving monetary standards that have the capability to float the new and poorly regulated world economy that can justly serve all, we must have economics and justice going hand in hand. Eisenstein states that money is the problem because of the depersonalization and the commodification of everything that is entailed. Eisenstein sees money as quantifiable and finite as opposed to the unquantifiable things such as love, friendship, spirituality that are infinite. So the next stage, he sees it of a human economy as calling forth the gifts of each of us, emphasizing cooperation over cooperation, encouraging circulation over hoarding, a cyclical economy rather than a linear one, and no split between spirit and matter concerning economics. He says that on a deep level, money and consciousness are intertwined. So the gift economy is about what people make and do for each other, how to connect the provider of a gift with the person who needs that gift. He parallels here money as a medium of exchange. In other words, he's trying to make money sacred as well as a part of the gift economy. Secondly, how to acknowledge and honor those who give generously of their gifts, which parallels the use of money as a unit of account. And thirdly, how to coordinate the gift of many people across space and time in order to create things. Here, money is a store of value. So the key microeconomic elements of sacred economics from an age of separation to a gift society involve, first of all, negative interest currency. Eisenstein is wanting to get rid of interest in general, but he goes a step further with the negative interest, which is an old concept of demurrage charged money. But this would be involving, say, minus 1% interest, which if computed across 12 months would be 12% interest. This encourages to keep money circulating. And of course, the idea of redistributing wealth would also be aided with this negative interest currency. Secondly, the elimination of economic rents and compensations for depletion of the commons being what is the patrimony of all that we've been given by nature. So the rents would be replaced by taxes for the use of land and mineral rights and oil. Thirdly, internalization of social and environmental costs involves dealing with the waste that's produced by commerce and by industry. The cap and trade is an example of handling carbon emissions. Green tax for the use of oil rights and the use of forest and water. Economic and monetary localization is more familiar to all of us. That's putting people in place together, connecting them, and getting rid of a lot of middlemen. The social dividend is not just a welfare society, but it's making sure that everyone gets the minimum requirements of life. And they work because they want to work. Economic degrowth involves this social dividend, and the removal of interest makes it possible to slow down growth and consume less. Suppose rather than having 20% of people not working at all, we have 20% of the people working less and having more leisure time, so that they could involve themselves in the seventh point, a gift culture, where they could have exchanges with each other of those non-quantifiable gifts as opposed to the realm of money. So it wants to shrink the realm of money. We might look at some examples of the gift culture that already exists, like the internet is mostly fabricated by gifts that people do most of the, the Wikipedia is almost a voluntary effort on the part of all. Craigslist is another example. But there are many in which if we had more leisure time, we could offer more gifts to develop community and have more time to spend with each other. We could develop the arts and culture to a greater extent. So the next step we take is looking from economics to looking at the environmental movement. Paul Hawken's book, Blessed Unrest, many of you may be familiar with, he says that the environmental movement is the largest social movement in human history, approximately 2 million organizations, he guesses. And it evolved independently from bottom up. It focuses on ecological sustainability and social justice, ecological degradation, and climate change. This Blessed Unrest anthem comes from Martha Graham, who, quote, "There's only a divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive." So this, I think, also has an echo of what Sarkar sees as struggle as the essence of life. Hawkins, in his restorative economy, says that individuals, institutions, and corporations must cooperate in restoring the planet by removing whatever prevents the system from healing itself based on the principles of justice and ecology. So now let us turn and look at the biological, psychosocial, and spiritual foundations for cooperation. Kozolina has written an interesting book, The Healthy Aging Brain, in 2008, and he says that the brain is a social organ linked to other brains, an organ of adaptation to change, and it's only understood in relationship to other brains. And mirror neurons are there also to help us with imitation and empathy, hopefully in a positive social environment. Human nature, he says, relationships are the primary environment for human nature. Just as there's a synapse between the neurons of the brain, there's also the social synapse transporting sight, sound, and thoughts and feelings between individuals, external neural circuits for one another. This also promotes outer suggestion or satsang, social support. And the ultimate relationship, of course, Bhagavad Dharma, is becoming one with Supreme Consciousness. Hormones promote and maintain these healthy interpersonal relationships and are a key biopsychological foundation for cooperation. Oxytocin being one of them, it rises in response to remembering positive relationships, decreases in remembering negative relationships, increases in response to positive emotions in committed relationships, and it promotes bonding in relationships between everyone. Recent update on endorphin research. Endorphins were thought to initially be primarily like morphine and a painkiller and associated with runner's high. But now it's been touted as a peptide for bliss and bonding and attachment. If we see here, low endorphin in a tail-wagging dog is reversed by petting and touching the dog. And we see this also in the joyfulness of children at play. Rough and tumble play stimulates endorphins and bonding. Storytelling also. The positive self-narrative increases endorphins. The negative self-narration will inhibit endorphins. Now, the deep ecology helps us look at our relationship with the environment. We must develop therapies which heal our relationship with the widest community, that of all living beings, according to Arnie Naess. The world is a being, part of our own body. And Edward Wilson took the concept of biophilia, wrote a book. It's about the urge to affiliate with other living beings. That's the translation of biophilia. But he says it's an innate bond between human beings and other living systems. Erich Fromm is responsible for the original term, biophilia. So we see our relationship with plants and animals. We feel this connection with the inanimate, with the environment that surrounds us, the serenity and beauty of it, even a bare desert landscape. And we have ecopsychology popularized by Theodore Roszak that helps us with adaptation to the natural environment that we have evolved in and our emotional bond with the natural world. Overcoming alienation from the environment, which is a problem in urban communities. Some people have never been out of the city and they feel alienated from the environment. There's ecotherapy as an integral part of psychotherapy to help overcome this alienation. And now we turn to looking at what is our true nature. Is our true nature to be violent or to be peaceful, cooperative beings? And Steven Pinker wrote a book, 800-page book, entitled The Better Angels of Our Nature, Evidence that Mankind is Becoming Less Violent. He goes back to food-gathering people in ancient times, in prehistoric times, and looking at them as being rather hostile and quick to express violence. And he comes forward through to modern times, and he sees a big turn away from violence with the age of reason, with the printing press sharing more information, helping develop the age of reason and rationality, a higher value placed on human life with humanitarian philosophies, and also the increased respect for the values of women. And but this is one of the most impressive pieces of data he presents, the Sources of Human Security Report Project. It shows the waning of war when we look at worldwide battle deaths per 100,000 people. This is looking at wars that were colonial, interstate, civil, and civil with foreign intervention up from 1940s to 2000. It's a rather impressive graph. So Pinker's historical forces that have favored our more peaceful motives are the Leviathan, the rule of law, Thomas Hobbes' creation of nature states and the rule of law to diffuse exploitation, regulation of commerce has helped with the distribution of wealth, feminization or respect for the values of women, and this largest circle of cosmopolitanism where people are more inclusive and more empathic with different people, learning to live in a diverse society. And of course the escalator of reason, rationality is on the rise, and that serves the common good. Now Pinker's conclusions are that though conflict is a human universal, so are efforts to reduce it. Mutual selfishness, he says, is ruinous, and the highest total payout is when all cooperate. Sustaining a less violent history requires reasoning by the movers and shakers of these 5 vectors. Robert Triver gives us a research tool to understand reciprocal altruism, which is contributing to this move towards a more peaceful society. 6 emotions are required for reciprocal altruism, he says. Liking, which is initiating and maintaining a partnership. Anger, self-protection when betrayed. Gratitude, a special feeling for cooperation. Sympathy, compassionate for one another. Guilt, useful and necessary price of betrayal. And shame, he regards as the strongest motivator to repair bond. So reciprocal altruism's 2 requirements to function long term are: first, the engaged individual must possess a cheater detector, which Richard Dawkins is famous for his cheater gene. Secondly, a tit-for-tat strategy that begrudges a gross cheater further help, as this reflects again the thinking of Sarkar and Ananda Sutram. Obstacles are helping forces in attaining our goal. So Axelrod is the one who's given us the tool, the game, to study this reciprocal altruism. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. Dilemma because each prisoner, not knowing the other's moves, must make a bet with considerable cost if the bet is lost. So this is how the game is played. If prisoner B and A cooperate, they both serve 1 month. But if prisoner B decides to defect and confess, then prisoner A gets 1 year and prisoner B goes free for offering state's evidence. And then if both confess, they serve 3 months. Now you can see that it's tilted towards being a defector. Is in the short run, it's more beneficial to be a defector. And this same balance is there when the game is changed to a money game where you have played with a banker. Here again, you see that defection in the short run gets more money. But in the long run, if they both cooperate, they get $300 over a long period of time. So what's happening here is if we extend the number of games played, iterated play, many agents interacting constantly, giving variations in strategies and a more real-life look to this game, then the results gives way to true reciprocal altruism. And repeated play results in a lot of time and memory that produces strategies that resulted in minimum punishment and mutual benefits without excessive cost. Now I think we can think about the current crisis in Crimea that here we're seeing a tit-for-tat game with Russia and the U.S. But today, Obama and Kerry are talking with people, with Putin and his representatives. And if this is carried out in a tit-for-tat threat, then if the diplomacy goes on, it's more likely to end in cooperation. So extending diplomacy is critical for achieving what this game can achieve. So the tit-for-tat is allowed to interact with each other, and many individuals in the same group. This population adopts the winning strategy of tit-for-tat eventually. Over time, the first move being cooperation, followed by whatever the opponent does next. And this produces a pattern of tit-for-tat, never defects first and only in retaliation. Thus, non-cooperative moves are always met with retaliation. Tit-for-tat has proven to be the most evolutionary stable strategy. So we need something to support this scientific approach to this game and what is actually being played out in real life. But what is needed is a real universal morality. So to create a more peaceful and sustainable society, we have to seek this universal ethics and values and have institutions that inspire a sense of common ground for all beings and a shared moral activism to support the collective welfare. E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist that we've quoted on biophilia, he suggested in 1975 that this should become the province of science, that it should be morality should be taken away from philosophers and put in the hands of evolutionary and biological thinking scientists. So the science of morality, John Haidt in a Morality Forum, he said that we should resort to collective moral decisions to correct the natural confirmation bias of individuals. And now the confirmation bias states that people try to confirm what they have formerly reasoned or believed. Interestingly enough, neuroscience states that there's a part of the prefrontal cortex that's involved in editing reality to suit us. And so whenever something creates cognitive dissonance for the individual, this part of the brain gets very active and is pushing us towards a confirmation bias. Fortunately, there's another part of the brain in which we learn from mistakes that we see other people making. And this contributes to the collective process of moving towards a more reciprocal altruism. Neuroscientist Sam Harris at the same forum said there are 3 morality projects. One is developing a non-judgmental understanding of what people do at a cultural, psychological, and neurobiological level and creating a science of morality. Secondly, the project of understanding how the term morality relates to human well-being altogether. And thirdly, how to persuade people to act in a more consensually agreed upon benevolent manner. He says we must begin with project number 2 in his book on moral landscape, understanding right from wrong in universal terms. That the concept of well-being captures everything we care about in the moral sphere, he says. There are 1,000 different ways to tune the variables of selfishness versus altruism to land on a peak. land us on peaks of moral landscape. Here it's seen as a systolic moral landscape. Peaks represent the flourishing and well-being, and the valleys represent the deepest depths of misery. So finally, the question is, who then will answer the call to refine the definition of a universal morality and persuade the masses to adopt this benevolent and universal morality? Sarkar's neo-humanistic philosophy and education, along with his progressive utilization theory, offers a synthesis of spiritually based morality and a path towards social equality. Jama and Niyama represent an inner and outer ecology that neo-humanism makes use of, and this ancient code of morality and ethics is called Jama Niyama. It's dedicated to the welfare of all beings, animate and inanimate, achieving personal and social balance based on consideration of time, place, and person beyond any dogma. The systolic movement of morality is the bedrock of spiritual progress. And at the center of the moral persuasion of neo-humanism is awakened conscience. It answers the call for discriminating intuition based on rationality, study, and proto-spiritual mentality. It transcends the emotionally based sentiments such as geo-sentiments, socio-sentiments, and human sentiments, establishing devotional sentiments towards all animate and inanimate beings. Through study, it seeks consensus to overcome confirmation bias and arriving at choices that serve social equality, achieving reciprocal altruism beyond tit for tat. In other words, someone who is steeped in Jama and Niyama has no intention to harm. So we look now at the companion philosophy of Sarkar's Prout, the companion philosophy with neo-humanism. And the tenet there that is most important is one must not forget that collective welfare lies in individuals and individual welfare lies in collectivity. The Prout values of cosmic inheritance, everything is the patrimony of all. Individuals and collective progress are defined on a physical, mental, and spiritual level. Minimum necessities of life are provided to all. Surplus wealth is distributed according to merit. And living standards of a vital society are constantly increasing. At the center of Prout's social cycle stand the Sadvipras, who prevent exploitation. They have the qualities of workers, warriors, and entrepreneurs and intellectuals who are actors in this revolving social cycle. The cycle, like Einstein's cyclical economy, evolves or becomes revolutionary to accommodate needed progress. Sadvipras, like pinkers, movers, and shakers, apply the necessary force to keep the cycle moving. Now, we need a neo-humanist education to transform the society and teach people at all levels of society these values, from pre-K through university levels. And it's based on the philosophy and principles of neo-humanism, the love of all of creation. Neo-humanist education incorporates a flexible blending of Eastern subjectivity and Western objective science, making it adaptable to different cultures of the world. Neo-humanistic education and Prout are vehicles for creating the needed shift in consciousness towards a more cooperative and spiritual society. These neo-humanist education values that we all hold so dear also include exemplary role of educators. We need to highly value educators and parents as the purveyors of this neo-humanism. And as a result, this young angel here is a result of our neo-humanist education. So humanity is now at the threshold of a new era. We don't want any dogma. The age of dogma is gone. These are Sarkar's quotes from this speech that he gave. It's RU speech. What we want is an idea based on neo-humanism. In this new era, dogmas are being replaced by rationality and reason that serves the entire humanity rather than a particular tribe or a particular clan or a particular nationality. Moralists of the world unite would be our motto. we need to combine with all the well wishes of society, many of the scientists and all mentioned in this presentation, to accomplish this mission. So the take home should be understanding this convergence of knowledge and evidence from many fields that we've crossed the threshold into a new era of peace and cooperation, and to understand some of the biological, psychosocial, and spiritual forces that move us towards greater cooperation and unity. And finally, neo-humanism, seeing how it serves as a hub for a synthesis of universal morality, social, economic, and psychosocial movements, contributing to an era of cooperation and spirituality. So this is the beginning of the era of neo-humanism and the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to having some interaction with you.
Yes. Now I step back into my role as MC and invite people to raise a hand if they have a question. I note that no questions have been put together during the talk, and I'm not surprised actually, because Sid, you did such a wonderful job of keeping us focused and engaged that I'm sure everybody was just listening. I managed to scribble a few points along the way, but I'm going to only go to those if we don't hear from attendees or if there's a lull at some point. So we have quite a few people with us now, and I'm inviting you please to just raise your hand, which you can do by going to the attendees little plus sign on the dashboard, and that's you should all have before you, and clicking to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment or a reflection. While you're thinking about all of this, I'm going to ask Sid the first question. You know, I guess it's a question wrapped up in an observation. I can see so clearly the connection between the talk I gave in the last session, looking at relational consciousness, with things that you've raised here, the sacred, the idea of sacred money and the gift culture, that there is a sense of alienation from nature, and that to find our way back, concepts such as reciprocal altruism, I guess, are vehicles for fermenting the era of neo-humanism. And of course, such an era, already upon us in many ways, is still in its birth pangs. And I'm wondering, when you're thinking about economics, Sid, for instance, as a very core issue for human beings, how do you see us beginning a conversation beyond our own small circle with people in the broader world? Over to you.
Well, I think that Charles Eisenstein says that this is a rather utopian idea to return to a gift economy that indigenous people had, and he doesn't expect that to happen except in the far future. But he's looking at steps that people are already taking, and local economy gives people more of a chance to have those types of exchange rather than money. It's not bartering. It's saying, what do you need? And you give it, not expecting something in return. And other people give you what you need. And if you have local economies, it helps that process of the gift culture. But he's also citing that the internet is another big example of a gift culture, of how people provide things to one another, as well as Craigslist and all the opportunities of, let's say, we can look at the NGO world. And it's a gift culture. The NGO world is a gift culture. They operating, many of them, some of them may be making profits, but most of them are losing money and having to get support from different foundations and public support. But the NGO world is a huge world. It's a part of the UN, and it's a gift culture. So it's happening, but it's off in the far future to see that gift culture be saturating society and giving up the interest that you make on money and having, social dividends. We're a long way from getting people to accept those ideas.
And that was one of the most encouraging things to come out of my reading of Hawken's book on Blessed Unrest, is that he's charting the grassroots work towards forms of reciprocal relationship and a gift economy. I noticed that Didi Jodhishri has raised her hand, so I'm going to open the floor for Didi to ask a question or make a comment.
Well, I just joined. Somehow I miscalculated the time, and I just heard the very last bit of it. And this is my first webinar, so actually I pressed that button by mistake.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Is there...
Glad you can be with us, Didi.
Hello?
Yes, Didi, I hear you.
So, Didi,
Go ahead, Didi.
No, I don't really have a...
Okay, that's fine, Didi.
I couldn't come up with a question yet.
Yeah.
All right.
So we might keep talking, Sid, because everybody else is quietly thinking away at the moment. And, you know, we do have many areas of overlap. One of the things that I wrestle with my students all the time is this confirmation bias, the concept that you raised in your talk. And I think it would be great to hear a little bit more about that, because when we talk about rationality, and you talked about it towards the end of your talk, rationality is a double-edged sword, because as you note, small vested interest groups can harness rationality to their own interests. Could you please speak a bit to that?
Yeah, so this notion of confirmation bias is really based on an older concept of cognitive dissonance in psychology, that anything that disturbs our own harmony of the way we see things creates what we call cognitive dissonance. It makes us uncomfortable, and there's a part of the brain that starts to get activated when that happens, and it tries to then preserve old ideas, which becomes dogma, like dogma. So this confirmation bias, which is driven by this dissonance, people having different ideas from yours and you wanting to hold on to yours, this creates conflict, and it makes people not very good scientists or very good social entrepreneurs. So this confirmation bias is in everyone. Everyone is operating and maybe needs to do some personal assessment of it, whether you're a scientist or involved in social reform. It's very easy to fall into this, and we can see it as a way of falling into dogma, which Bob was saying we need to get rid of that. And rationality is another way. You know, some people are better talkers than others, and they can use logic to defend their position, and they're not open to listening to others. But assuming the mind of the beginner is a way of bypassing that confirmation bias, that we know very little. Baba was asked once on a field walk some complex question, and Baba says, I don't know the answer. I know nothing, he said. So the model we have in our mentor is to not be so full of knowing this and knowing that people need to realize how finite the human mind is, and that helps us avoid the confirmation bias, to be open to listening to something new in a conversation, as opposed to just trying to confirm our old beliefs.
Yeah, and that's where I guess cognitive bias, actually linking it to dissonance, cognitive dissonance is great, because for me then I see a very clear link to the tit-for-tat experiments that you described, because the tit-for-tat raises cognitive dissonance to another level, doesn't it?
Yes, and I would refer you to an article by Adair Jones. She's doing a neuroscience master's on leadership, and she writes very clearly about this confirmation bias and its relationship neurologically and she discusses this cognitive dissonance. A very clear science writer.
Okay.
You can find her on the internet. Adair, A-D-A-I-R, Jones, J-O-N-E-S.
You've raised just a technical point here as well, Vishwamitra. For you to, when we put the webinar up and make it available to people who couldn't attend the live session, it would be great to have a book of suggested readings or references, and not a book, a slide or two with those. And that, of course, you could add Adair Jones's work to that. But I want to keep chasing this concept of dogma and it's linked to rationality, because I think there's a very strong link to rationality. I've just been revisiting my readings of Plato, and in the Republic he talks about us having a good society needs guardians to protect and maintain order, and those guardians, in some ways, if you were a kind of superficially reading that, you could say, well, they like Sadvipras. And Plato, of course, has impacted the last 2,000 years of social thinking with his very beautiful, elegant, and in some ways rational thinking. But in other ways, he's given us a total red herring there. And so for me, dogma needs to be understood as something that pervades all that we do, and it's very much linked to that confirmation bias. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. But I think that what you're getting at, one of the products of these seminars that we're giving should be some inspiration for leadership that represents a model that's like Sadvipra leadership. Yeah. That it represents humility and the absence of so much ego and confirmation bias. This whole business of the science has given us some research, and that we should look at that and take that seriously, because the tit-for-tat model is happening throughout the world and throughout all relationships. But rather than seeing human beings as having cheater genes, we have a, Bhagavad Dharma. Yeah. We see individuals as having this dharmic path, but it requires a universal morality to support it. And that's why this non-dogmatic situational ethics we have of Jama and Niyama is so critical to create that type of leadership, to express that morality based on time, place, and person. And it's based on having our practice of sadhana to develop the intuition so that we can use it well. Yeah. And I guess that, of course, can start, and this is where Gurukul is often associated with schools, with pre-kindergarten and primary schools, and then occasionally higher schools as well. And we have an aspirational sort of university on the table before us. But education is much, much more than that. Conversation, social interaction, the reciprocity that you're talking about is all part of this Gurukul vision, isn't it? Yes. By reciprocity, we're talking about, again, that relational consciousness. Yes. That both your talk on the evolution of consciousness and mine focuses on, that relationship to others, to the environment, to all beings. And our education is really about that, about restoring that relational consciousness. That's right. And I see that as a social program. One of the goals of Gurukul is to begin conversations in all areas of learning, not just, let's say, the pedagogy of curriculum in the classroom, but in all social interactions. And, of course, we want to, I guess, frame it within a discourse of social learning, but we have to understand that it's much more than just the classroom. It's actually built into the moral landscape that you've been describing. And, of course, the role that Jama and Niyama, the practices, because Jama and Niyama is more about what we do and how we do it than just the rules of Jama and Niyama, that, the 10 points that we have. Yeah, but what the problem today is that when we dealt with those scientists who are trying to develop a science of morality, they're still all very much based on cultural relativism. They do not think there's any such thing as a universal morality. But Harris is the one exception among all the science that I've read that sees it as something, universal morality is essential to develop it, and he's not afraid to take on the other scientific community in looking for this universal morality. And of course, there we have Jama Niyama, which really gives an answer to those scientists about how to begin to put together a universal ethics. Yeah.
So I guess, as with all paradigm shifts, and when we talk of an era of neo-humanism, we are talking about a paradigm shift. There's a period of where the idea seems so fringe as to be irrelevant. Then there's a period of resistance and deep contestation, and then there's a period of breakthrough, and historically we can see that regularly. For me, this concept of the era of a neo-humanism reminds me very much of the work of Thomas Berry, who wrote that beautiful book, The Dream of the Earth, that some people may know, where he says it's all a question of story. We're in trouble now because we do not have a good story. In fact, we are between stories. So the fact that Harris is taking on his colleagues on an issue like this suggests that, we are no longer at that period of transition where it's just beginning. We're actually in the period of contestation.
Right. And all of these people that I've quoted in tonight are sensitive to this shift that's occurring. And Sarkar, back in the early 80s said we have crossed the threshold into a new era. There's a new wave of thought in the human mind. And he's referring, I think, to this love of all of creation and this understanding of the interrelatedness of all things. Yeah. And so all of these people that I've presented tonight are coming under this influence of seeing the same birth of a new era, of this transition into this era. So it's being, we shouldn't think that Ananda Marga is the only. Ananda Marga is bigger than people who know the name Ananda Marga. Yeah. Neo-humanism is bigger than those people who have ever heard of the word neo-humanism. We are seeing it in the people I presented tonight, these neo-humanistic thoughts and Eisenstein's Proutistic thoughts. This is happening in a viral way, this shift in consciousness. This new wave of thought is viral. And it's there, and we should be reaching out to these people to work with them so that all this of the world who are well-wishers of society can work together. Yeah. Like Hawken is saying, that the biggest movement ever in the world is the environmental movement, but they don't know each other. Yeah. It's an organic movement, and it's probably good that it functions that way, but they haven't come together yet. So in this transition we're in, many people are having the same thoughts and wanting to see the same movements occur, but they haven't started to work collectively yet. And that's the role of leadership that Ananda Marga needs to step forward and offer that connectivity with all the like-minded people to create that forum and that dialogue among like-minded people is part of our responsibility, I think. And Baba has urged us as moralists of the world to unite.
That's true. I think the slowness in the uptake in terms of collective functioning is because we actually don't know how to work collectively when we get to a certain critical mass, and we fall back into old hierarchical processes. I think it's one of the areas that we haven't touched on here. But how do we deal with new forms of leadership where leadership empowers rather than us defaulting to, I'm giving you my agency so you can lead?
Yeah, Liz Wiseman wrote a book called Multipliers, and it's a new book about leadership. And it defines good leaders, very positive leaders, as leaders who think that everybody in their organization is intelligent, is creative, and can solve problems. And that's communicated to everyone. And those people get tremendous productivity and creativity at their work site, those types of leaders.
Yes. Yes, you're right. And I think this reminds me also of a scientist working in the area of I guess, thinking about his own discipline. He's not a philosopher of science because he's actually a practitioner, but Jeremy Ravets talks about it, the new normal, which of course is a concept from Tippett, I think it was. But this new normal he's applying very clearly to science and saying there are new normals where we need to be aware of the connection between science and economics, and drawing a whole bunch of other relationships that are essentially moral and ethical. I've just noticed, by the way, that Shubhendra has raised his hand. So he said, I'm going to, because we're getting close to the end of this session, I'm just going to open it up for Shubhendra, and we'll see what he's got to say.
All right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have been hearing the presentation. It was a nice one. And I would like to say that we have been hearing about making different models, and people are putting various propositions of cultural morality, and Baba has put up of universal morality and Prout and all. Do we have a working model on a smaller scale which we can present to the world? Here in India, at least, I have not seen any working model of Prout or any cooperative being established properly. At least in the West, do we have that which we can replicate here?
I think coming closest to a practical models are some of the master units that have gone on and developed nicely. Here at Anandagiri Sutta, we are experimenting with a model that, and we have Prout is here, we have Haranmaya and Ramesh, who are writers and not just theoreticians, but they're also participating in creating this master unit, Anandagiri Sutta, and we're also creating a Margi community allied with it that's an eco-village that is separate from the master unit, but the people living there support the work on the master unit. And of course, it has to do with agriculture. It has to do with creating medical clinics. We have that being developed in a wellness center. It has to do with creating education, which we are trying to create a school. So the model, the master units serve, I think, is the flagship for examples for Proutistic endeavors. So we have lots of wonderful master units in all over the world. South America has blossomed with a number of them as well. So if I had to look for a practical model in Australia, South America, the U.S., and in Europe and Ireland, and in India, these master units really are places where we can see the blossoming of a Proutistic model that we can show the world.
Yeah, I think they're great examples, and the whole point is, of course, is that we are all socially experimenting. And I think your point that when you raised that the Ramesh and Co. that you mentioned, that we are involved with theory and practice. So essentially, however we approach this question of birthing an era of neo-humanism, it's pragmatism that's going to lead the way. Grounded in a spiritual biophiliac sort of worldview, where we're connecting and integrating, testing, experimenting, working, taking what works, throwing out what doesn't, because it's only through practice that we actually shift consciousness.
Yeah, you know, it's Baba refers to Prout and neo-humanism as practices, and not just theories.
That's very important. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say just before we wrap it up? I've been watching the clock. We're rapidly running to the out of time. So, Sid, thank you so much. What else? If you're going to have one last crack at this, what would you like to say?
Well, I like that note of the practical and the expression of a practice that people look in their own individual lives at how they are practicing these principles of neo-humanism and Prout. And the last question saying, where are their models? Where are their examples? We need to create them in our own personal lives. So I think that's where the change in the world begins that we want, is with each of us in living by these principles.
Yeah.
And Baba said to me with personal contact, he said, do something great for the suffering humanity. And I was a little overwhelmed and awed. And he saw that, and he leaned over and he said, and remember, holding his thumb and forefinger very close to each other, he said, something small can be great.
Yes, thanks.
And so to not forget that everyone is a contributor, and everyone can do something small, and out of that, something great can grow. And it's always available to us. We shouldn't be pessimistic about looking for models outside of ourselves.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Thank you for that. Dr. Sid Jordan, it was a great presentation, coherent, elegant and precise, and much food for thought. Certainly I will be going back and re-listening to it again. And I look forward also to that list of references. I'd like to remind everybody just before we sign off that our next presentation is April the 19th, and it's entitled Reflections on the Nature of Microvita. Microvita being subtle energy consciousness forms. And the presenter is Mr. Henk de Veer, and he spent many, many years focusing on this question, and it's going to be a great session. It will be a different time zones because Henk is based in the Netherlands. From me, Marcus Bussey, and the Gurukul webinar crew, I want to thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to hearing from you all in the future. Take care.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.